Hello and welcome to the Super 70 Podcast, special edition with Paul Emig, Star Wars Part 2. Welcome back to another special edition of the Super 70 Podcast. It is unlikely that I will ever get a chance to record a commentary for any Star Wars film, so I think this is healthy for me and my listeners to knock out. Paul somehow decided it wasn't that bad sitting in my cramped office / studio talking about our favorite subject for a couple of hours, so he decided to come back and, well, I guess he's a glutton for punishment. This episode, we're doing the rundown on Gareth Edwards' Rogue One, which by now we know is only 2/3 his movie, and Ron Howard's Solo. What is so right with Rogue One, and where does Solo go wrong? What did we expect out of these two non-saga projects? And what in the hell did we get? Join Paul and I as we run down the rabbit hole discussing Tony Gilroy, The Weakest Link, the dangers of miscasting, and what the future might hold for us once Jon Favreau finally takes control of Lucasfilm. How's it going, Paul?
Going pretty good.
It's been a stressful few weeks at work.
Yeah.
The virus is kicking a lot of people's ass, and
right.
However, last weekend was it? I saw Goodfellas.
Okay.
In the theater on the big screen.
Right.
$5 at the Studio Movie Grill.
Right.
And they did the Dark Knight Rises, same place. So I'm thinking about going tomorrow.
Gotcha. Okay.
They sent me free tickets.
Nice.
Since I'm a member of the Studio Movie Grill, Cinemark, and AMC all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm just that much of a nerd.
No, I understand.
So
I understand.
Got to cover your bases.
There you go.
You know, I did drive by the Cinemark today on the freeway, and I saw that it was open.
They have something similar to where they've got some favorites.
Right.
I saw Empire Strikes Back.
No.
Yeah.
On the big screen?
$5. So,
oh my God!
Yeah.
Where at Cinemark?
Yeah, I don't know what the times are, but I did see because we're a member of the Cinemark as well. So they're letting Rewards Club members. Giving them a couple free tickets to kind of ease them back in. Of course, there's no real movies to see. Hollywood's holding all the good stuff until it's safe to have a packed house. But they did have this thing for $99. You can have a private showing.
Yeah.
Just have a whole theater. You pick from a list of 20 movies. All of them. Some classics, some that have come out in the last couple of years. I think like Jurassic Park's on there, stuff like that. I think Raiders of the Lost Ark is on there as well. For $100 you can have the whole cinema to yourself.
They're directly competing with Studio Movie Grill.
Yeah,
because they have the same thing, but it's $200.
Ah, okay.
And of course, when Luke and I went to go see Goodfellas, there were a grand total of 6 people in that theater.
Right,
anyway,
so you're probably gonna do the thing, the same thing. Yeah,
but that would be something, particularly for $99. I'd be completely
sure.
In a non-virus world, I'd do that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
When I lived in Calgary, Cineplex Odeon. The Cineplex chain in Canada is probably the largest, at least in Western Canada, and they had a deal where you could rent out the theater for birthday parties, and they would hook up your Xbox.
Oh, nice.
To the digital projector. So they had kids having. I mean, people would invite their entire. So I think it was about $400 Canadian.
Right.
People were inviting their entire class.
Yeah. Right.
Because to fill up 250 seats. Everybody in 6th grade was there.
Right.
Canadian schools being much smaller than ours are. Right.
Right.
Okay. So I'm excited about what's back on the screen.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see The Dark Knight.
Sure.
Drive across town to see that maybe.
Right.
So we'll see what's up, and it's nice that they're kind of slowly easing back in.
Right. And have you felt safe going back to like the ones that you've seen?
Yeah, with 6 people in a theater with there's more people working at the theater than the people who are going to see the movie. I feel completely safe.
Right.
And I do feel that they're wiping everything down. But if you listen to, I don't want to get controversial. If you listen to Dr. Fauci, and I know
Right.
there are people who are not fans of his, this is a respiratory illness, and it's passed. I don't want to get into the science, but it seems to be passing from person to person.
Right.
So masks are important.
Right, but you're not necessarily going to get it from a surface.
Right.
And I think if they do assigned seating, then they know which seat they have to clean.
Yeah.
They don't have to clean necessarily every single seat in the theater.
Yeah, and the Cinemark app will only let you select certain seats. Like it'll X out like an entire row or every other seat or something. Studio Movie Girl, they just have signs like no one in this row. So I had to go back and say I got seats in a row that says no one. Like it doesn't matter. You're one of 4 people who are here. Not that big of a deal. I did see some. We went to go see. I don't remember if it was Temple of Doom or The Last Crusade, and there were some wackos up in the front row. Like my age with his wife or girlfriend.
Right.
And I was just thinking, why are you doing that to yourself?
We loved doing that at 12 years old.
Yeah.
I guess we thought it was the thing. Of course, we didn't have stadium seating back then. We had that kind of gradual slope to the theater. So I guess it did feel a little bit more intense, depending on the movie.
The things we enjoy now.
Yeah, exactly.
Stadium seating.
Yeah.
So before we get into Star Wars, and we're expecting this to be a short episode because we're only discussing
2 movies,
two
right?
movies to wrap up,
the saga, so to speak.
Right. Man. Okay, so I briefly discussed this with Dave, and I'm going to lead into a story I read on Variety magazine this week, or Variety's website, rather, because nobody reads magazines anymore.
Right.
I went to Paramount Studios in March, the week before California shut down, and my son and I were in the lobby before they take you to the studio tour, and they had a bunch of pictures on the wall, and each picture had a story next to it. And, of course, it talked about the pseudo-founder of Paramount Studios, Adolf Zucker. Mm-hmm. So Adolf Zucker, 19 teens, he actually had another studio, bought Paramount, liked the name, adopted the name, took over the studio grounds, and he's the one who came up with the stars around the mountain.
Okay.
Each star represented a actual movie star that was contracted, and the stars changed over time until one day they decided to keep it, I think, at 36 stars. So during the 1919 pandemic, Zucker actually, all the theaters closed down, of course. Zucker sent out agents that worked for him to buy up the majority of the movie chains. Mm-hmm. And most of them were independent, except for Lowe's theater chain, which is still around today.
Right.
And he bought those theaters after about 10 or 12 months, so they would be at rock bottom prices, and people were just dying to get rid of their movie theaters.
Right.
And then when it was all over, he had a completely integrated system where he controlled the means of production, the distribution, and the exhibition of his product. So this meant that the Warner Brothers had to actually kowtow. They had to come down out of the mountains and go to Hollywood and ask Adolf Zucker to display their movies in his theaters.
Wow. Okay.
So, of course, that led to Warner Brothers saying, well, we need a theater chain, so our product is safe. And then MGM did the same. And then if you wanted to go see Gone with the Wind, you had to go to an MGM-owned theater.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right? So if you wanted to see a certain product, the biographs were all owned by... pick one of the majors, Fox Studios. You had to go to a Fox Studios. That ended with a lawsuit in the late 40s, early 50s. It basically was trust busting, and it broke them all up. Mm-hmm. I bring that up because of this article I read recently, which was that trust was broken a couple of years ago by another lawsuit that actually Netflix filed.
Okay.
So... Netflix was caught in a very strange situation where they had films like Roma, which was nominated for Best Picture and is in the Criterion Collection, that a lot of people just dearly love, and they think it's a full-blown art film, and I completely agree. And it ran in the circuits, and a lot of people were in the Academy were really pissy about allowing it in because it was a Netflix film, and to them, a streaming service is not a TV
movie, right? Yeah.
Right, and. What's the difference between Netflix and TV? I mean, you can have that argument. The big pisser for me was The Other Side of the Wind. Mm-hmm. 1973 film, Orson Welles shot. It was supposed to be his second to last film. He died in 1985. It was never released. It was caught up in an endless, amazing round of lawsuits that went on for 30 years that involved French law, art belongs to the artist, and American law, which is everything is owned by the children of or the next of kin. And if you ever get a chance to get into it, you should, but it is amazingly complicated. And basically, Frank Marshall, the famous Hollywood producer responsible for Jurassic Park and 1,000 other movies,
right,
who's actually Kathleen Kennedy's husband, Kathleen Kennedy who's
Lucasfilm,
currently running Lucasfilm. He brokered a deal with Netflix to pay off all the interested parties, Orson Welles' daughters and his surviving ex-girlfriend, and they brought The Other Side of the Wind to Netflix.
Okay.
They held it from streaming, I should say, because they wanted to put it in Cannes. Well, you know what the French have to say about Netflix. That wasn't going to happen.
Right.
And the Hollywood establishment got pretty snooty because they think, well, if it's not showing in a theater, then you can't present it to the Academy.
Right.
Which I think is just complete bullshit.
Sure.
So this has led Netflix to actually purchase a theater in New York, and the Old Egyptian Theater, which is on Hollywood Boulevard, one block east of Grauman's Chinese Theater, and one block east of the El Capitan Theater on Hollywood Boulevard, where Citizen Kane premiered.
Right.
And they renovated it and everything. And the question is, can a studio own a movie theater anymore?
Right.
And so they sued, saying, we want to exhibit stuff. How can we apply for these awards if we can exhibit them?
Exactly. Because let's play for 1 week in LA, 1 week in New York?
Right. Yeah. The Other Side of the Wind, maybe a week.
Yeah.
It might run for a day.
Yeah.
But at least it gets exhibited.
Sure.
So, the article that came out this week was, it was very interesting because effectively it was wondering in 10 months who's going to be left standing in Hollywood.
Sure.
And I read an article last month that said Paramount is probably the first one to call it quits.
Gotcha.
And Paramount is owned by Viacom. Viacom might say this ain't worth it.
Right.
And just put it on the auction block. Now, whether someone like Netflix is interested in buying what is left of Paramount, I don't know. That seems like a stretch. I don't think Netflix is actually interested in owning anything physical.
Probably not.
Right.
They're giving away money left and right. It's at some point there's got to be a bottom to their coffers, right?
For sure. Yeah.
And if they're giving it to Scorsese to make make a 4-hour movie, go ahead. So I think that's where they're spending their money. So I'd be surprised if they did.
I'd be surprised at that. However, 10 months, 12 months, I'm sure that Lowe's theater chain is still going to be around. Cinemark, I don't know.
Yeah, it's
Edwards Cinema, I don't know.
Right.
And it begs the question, if Netflix won that lawsuit and studios are now allowed to own, I think, a minority of theaters is how the Supreme Court decided, or that judge in that case decided. What is a minority of cinema? There's 5 major studios. There always kind of have been. There's a dozen independents. Is Netflix going to go on a buying spree and just buy up 60% of the theaters like Adolf Zucker did? It's an interesting proposition.
It is, yeah.
Of history repeating itself.
Right, and I guess, is it the hard asset or is it a catalog? Or, I mean, kind of to what extent? What are they buying with that?
Right. So they have the capital.
Yeah, they do.
Like Apple.
And I imagine it's just gone up while the other studios have gone down, so their leverage has probably gone up a little bit too.
I don't know. I would imagine their subscription service have gone up since the pandemic. I would just guess that.
I would think that. I mean, I didn't know that many people who did not own Netflix before the pandemic.
Right.
So I don't know how much room it had to go up. But the reality is they're making money when nobody's making any money. So yeah, that'd be interesting to see.
So who's your second favorite streaming service right now?
Right now, we've got Hulu Premium, which seems to, because honestly, we've been streaming more TV. I think maybe we're at a point where our kids are teenagers. We're kind of showing them some shows that we enjoyed watching. when we were in college or just out of college or while they were really young. And so if I can't find it on Netflix, I've been able to find it on Hulu. It's kind of been my thing. But then again, it has been mostly TV. We haven't been streaming a ton of movies. So I don't know if that's just kind of a shift in our habits, if we kind of like the serialized storytelling, that long format, tell it over a season or multiple seasons. But I'd probably say Hulu, just from availability of TV content.
If you had to pick a show, well, what are you showing your kids?
Right now, we're showing them Lost.
Okay.
Yeah.
J.J. Abrams. I have never seen Lost. My wife is a huge fan. She loves it.
It's without giving too much away, I think it's a very exciting first couple of seasons. Asks a lot of big questions. Offers up a whole lot of mythology. So for fans who are into that kind of immersive experience to kind of talk about it and think about it and wonder, it's pretty appealing. I don't know that it quite sticks the landing. So, I mean, I think if you were to ask me now in 2020, is it worth going back and watching 6 years of Lost? My answer might be different than it would be in 2004 or 2005 when it started. But the kids seem to be enjoying it so far. We're only in season 2, so I know that kind of what the fuck moment will come, as they start kind of explaining some of the mysteries in season 4 and 5. And I don't know if they'll be happy with all the answers and all the explanations, but it's been fun.
How often is Evangeline Lilly in that? I understand
she's a regular. Yeah, she's probably in almost every episode.
Yeah, I was really unfamiliar with her until Ant-Man.
Right,
which was...
She hadn't done a lot of movies. I mean, she did The Hurt Locker, and that's about all I can think of.
I'm a big fan of The Hurt Locker, and I don't remember her role, so I'm going to have to go back and revisit that. But
sure.
The last chat I had with Dave Anderson, we talked about Catherine Bigelow.
Okay.
And how she's an underappreciated filmmaker.
Sure.
And I think, I wouldn't call it shitting on her, but, people just jammer on about James Cameron way too much.
Right.
And they don't give her due, I think.
That's fair.
I did see, I don't know if it was 6 months ago or how long ago it was, but it was regarding Lily and her presence in Lost, and it was, of course, we live in a different time now, the Me Too generation and Black Lives Matter and all of that, and she did an interview where she complained about a shot in the Lost where she had to wear a bikini and she was walking around. I don't know if it was for 5 minutes of the whole episode, but it made her extraordinarily uncomfortable, and she was expressing how she wished that she had never done that because she didn't want to expose that part of herself.
Sure.
Which I immediately empathized with. I'm like, nobody should be forced to do
sure.
something like that under any circumstances. However, that we shouldn't be looking down on actors who choose to do such a thing. So, of course, I was reading this on Twitter, and whoever was posting a story, this is both good and bad. I guess jerks that they are, they posted a still of her in the bikini.
Sure.
From the episode.
Right.
And, I mean, I don't want to say my take on it, but I've seen way worse situations.
Yeah.
And I have to say that I thought that she looked great.
Yeah, I think that going back again, we've seen every episode, but it's been a decade since we've seen the whole thing. But now we're about most of the way through season 2. I don't think it's exploitative. I think she's in a bikini much less than the men are shirtless, with glistening abs and perfect bodies there. So I didn't think it was exploitative. I mean, the reality of the situation is they're on a desert island with very few changes of clothing. Yeah. So you kind of shower in the ocean.
Tom Hanks showed more and passed away.
Exactly. So they're in kind of a rainforesty jungle and a beach. So I probably wouldn't be wearing that much clothing either. So it's just kind of
eventually it's going to go away. No, that's very good.
Yeah.
But it's not the point. What we think the point is what does she do?
Absolutely. And I think this is my observation as a viewer. It's not necessarily what the producer said or if network says, hey, how about we show a little skin for the ratings? Yeah. That's a different ask of an actor. That we might not perceive the whole story, but it would be a tough situation to be in as an actor.
Yeah, and I read very recently about Emelia Clarke, said that producers and directors were point blank telling her while she was already in a bed nude of hey, let's not disappoint your fans, and she's like, fuck you, this is my body,
right?
And absolutely, I mean, I wasn't a fan of that show anyway, but they've absolutely got it right. Like I thought there were writers beforehand. I thought there was like huge major discussions before you put an actor in that situation. And if there isn't, then it should be.
And I know that the more advanced you are in your career, the more say you have. I remember thinking, I don't know if you're familiar with this movie Carol, which I think had Cate Blanchett and Rooney Mara or Kate Mara, one of the Mara sisters.
Yeah.
And when you looked at the sex scenes in that movie, it was clear that Cate Blanchett had a nudity clause and Rooney Mara didn't. So it was kind of one of those. I can see who's the established already Oscar winner that can say, yeah, don't show my nipples, but the new kid, you can show her all you want.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Gwyneth Paltrow, her career arc is the same.
Yeah.
Rooney Mara was in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. And I don't think there was anything she didn't show on that.
Right.
And I remember being shocked when I saw that in the theater. I thought that was very brave of her to do it.
Right.
But that fell if you were a fan of those books, it fell very much within the same.
It did. And if you see the Swedish versions,
Swedish versions are bolder than that.
Same character,
with Noomi Rapace.
Yeah.
Who's awesome in that role. But Mara, I think, just has a different. She might just have a different mindset when it comes to that. She could just be one of those people where that doesn't.
It could be,
at all.
And I think that sometimes nudity, when it's used for non-sexual situations, can be like really attention-getting and powerful. I mean, you kind of talk about Game of Thrones. I think the most powerful nude scenes that Emilia Clarke did were not the sex scenes. It's the one where she emerges from the fire.
Right.
Her clothes would have burned off, but she doesn't have a scratch on her.
Yeah.
And then again later in, I think it's the last season. Spoiler alert, I think 2-3 years spoiler alert, where she burns down kind of all the
all the
calls and drogos, and emerges nude from the flames.
Mm-hmm.
I mean that's a very empowering moment, kind of a badass moment. But Game of Thrones, being Game of Thrones, did also have a lot of gratuitous sexual nudity as well.
It makes a lot of sense. The only thing I compare that to, like Denzel Washington did a movie about 20 years ago called Mississippi Masala.
Yeah.
And he got out of bed full frontal.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody brought it up. And his point was, well, it wouldn't have made any sense, first of all, if I got out and I had underwear on, because the situation was I was just in bed with this woman and we had sex. So that's not consistent with the character. And I think his second point was, would you be asking this of a female actor?
Right.
So it's kind of, we all know that there's biases.
Yeah.
And of course, I saw the film on VHS. I never noticed it. I'm sure that it was there, but it didn't stand out.
Right.
And I think nudity is so prevalent in film that a lot of us just tune it out.
Right. And definitely I think male full frontal nudity is less common. So I think we tend to remember that.
Like Ben Affleck and
or Harvey Keitel in the PA. He was naked.
Oh my God!
I think he may have even been like erect in some scenes. So I mean, there was some
on the piano.
A lot of Harvey Keitel in that movie.
The Bad Lieutenant,
which I never saw, but heard was the piano taken to another level in terms of Harvey Keitel exposure.
Yeah. Again, someone who doesn't seem to have a problem with it.
Yeah.
We'll put in the Seinfeld asterisk. Not that there's anything wrong with it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. I don't know how we got on that topic. But
that's right.
Regardless. So let's get into Star Wars.
Sure.
Rogue One. Why is that film for us fans a victory?
I was thinking about that. When we talked about discussing Rogue One with our next chat, and I think everyone's favorite, or every adult's favorite Star Wars film is The Empire Strikes Back. And to me, Rogue One is probably the most similar in tone. And I don't think it's just because it has kind of a downbeat ending. I think any Star Wars fans probably know going in that for this to work, people don't get out alive. Their mission may be a success, but they don't get out alive. But I think in terms of, there's some humor in there, but it's not cheesy humor. It's not one-liners. It's not puns. It's not a lot of situational humor. I think that the tone is more serious throughout. So I think it's more similar in tone to Empire. And maybe that's why it strikes that chord of, hey, you know what? There's some danger here. These stakes are very high. These characters, will probably die or could die. And although there's some levity, it's not the forced levity that we've seen in some of the other movies, where maybe Lucas was making them for a larger audience, including kids. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think it strikes a chord a little bit more with true Star Wars fans.
I definitely saw that its audience was more narrowed.
Yeah.
Than say Jedi.
Yeah.
For sure. It really had a heightened sense of danger.
It did. And in respect to the intelligence of the audience member.
I think so. Gareth Edwards, the director, he had done I think Godzilla before this, the remake with Bryan Cranston, mm-hmm. which I just so unbelievably enjoyed. Just really, really, really dug that film. Thought it was great, and so I was excited to see what was going on when they announced it, and then I was very disappointed to hear rumors that they had fired him mm-hmm. Towards the end of production, actually in post production, and then they had released a trailer, and then what you saw in the theater, a lot of what you saw in the trailer,
it wasn't in there. Yeah,
had people swinging their fists. It's not in the film.
Yeah,
and I don't think that anyone's going to be asking for an Edwards cut,
right?
Like we've got this great demand right now for the Snyder cut
of Justice League or any of those.
Right,
yeah,
which that whole story of Justice League just sounds like that's crazy.
Right.
That's like solo crazy.
Right.
Which we'll get into later. But Tony Gilroy, the director of Michael Clayton mm-hmm. and famous script doctor, he's written a few things. He took one pass through it, knew exactly what to do, sold Kathleen Kennedy on it, said I can pick up the pieces and I can move on. And I think he did a phenomenal job.
Yeah.
And he only shot, I think it's like 25 minutes of screen time. Mm-hmm. He picked it up effectively right when they get to the island.
Okay.
And then he reshot everything after that. First of all, it's like seamless.
Right.
You can't tell there's two different
Not at all.
directors.
Not at all.
So Gilroy did a very good job of looking at what Edwards had done mm-hmm. and then absolutely copying that style.
Right.
And that's been, I've read people who've written papers on like Tobe Hooper and how he just revered Spielberg and just looked at every Spielberg movie. And that's why a lot of Hooper's later films look so much like Spielberg.
Sure, right.
Right, including Poltergeist. Of course, that's a separate argument.
You almost couldn't tell,
Yeah. A lot of people claim that, and I believe it, Spielberg actually shot Poltergeist and Hooper produced it.
If nothing else, I get the sense that he was a strong mentor presence. And, I think it's obvious they shot in the same neighborhood, too. So I think...
Yeah, they admitted that.
There's that subtle...
Yeah.
Hey, here's E.T. There's another story on the other street from E.T., yeah.
Right. Going on simultaneously.
Yeah.
The casting diversity. When I remember opening up, I don't remember if it was Premiere Magazine or Entertainment Weekly or whatever it was, but they had the cast of there. And what did you think about the diversity of the cast?
I think it was good, and I think it's weird because I'm a big believer in diversity in film, and I'm the first to admit that there hasn't really been true representation in film in general, much less sci-fi or the Star Wars universe. And yet, I think there was something subtle about Rogue One that felt forced in The Force Awakens. Where it kind of felt like, okay, let's check boxes here and make sure we have an African American, a Latino, an Asian. It seemed like it was market tested before it was cast. Whereas Rogue One, I didn't necessarily feel that way.
Yeah.
It almost felt a little bit more organic with kind of the way this motley crew kind of came together. So I don't know, maybe it was just a matter of perception to where it didn't seem so forced in the diversity casting.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think that everybody in The Force Awakens is talented, mm-hmm. as I do throughout the whole trilogy.
Yeah, I wouldn't recast anyone necessarily.
Not necessarily, especially not John Boyega.
Right.
He just seems like I do remember The Force Awakens thinking that Oscar Isaac just didn't really fit for me.
Right.
But I could see how he could stand out.
Sure.
You know, he's kind of like the Han in that.
Right.
Right. He's the rebel. So if they want to go with that archetype, that seems fine. Rogue One, it didn't really even occur to me until I read an article about it about a month before it came out about, this is a diverse cast. You know, I'm going to go back to an interview that J.J. Abrams did. They asked him, like, why is it that all of your TV series have strong female roles?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, well, I just feel like the world has changed and we have to move on. And I don't really think of I'm writing a story for a strong female role. I feel like I just have to write a good story.
Right.
And if the female fits the role, then let's go with that. Unless there's something in it that innately it has to be a guy.
Right.
Because of X situation. Why can't we have some sort of equality about that? I think there's a lot to say about that. I think there's only one miscast role in Rogue One.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I watch it, it really makes me take a second guess. And that's Riz Ahmed.
Yeah.
Who plays the Imperial pilot.
Sure.
And immediately when he first came onto the screen, I was just thinking, this dude does not look. If you look at any Imperial pilot
mm-hmm.
in any Star Wars film before this,
right,
clean shaven, crew cut. I mean, looked like John Boyega,
right,
in Force Awakens, and Ahmed had a beard basically, like not even a full beard, like he hadn't shaven in a couple of weeks type of beard,
right,
and rather long unkempt hair.
Right.
And obviously there was a meeting to determine everyone's look and everyone's style and why. And I just don't understand why they made that choice for someone who is supposed to be an Imperial pilot.
Correct.
That didn't make sense to me. So as the film went on, that kept pulling me out of the story every time that he appeared.
Right.
Because I kept losing. So what is he doing again? Oh, he's the Imperial pilot who's decided to fight the Empire.
Right.
And I had to keep reminding myself of that because he didn't look like he was supposed to look.
Right, exactly. And we understand that, Imperial pilots are largely helmeted. We don't get to see them. But, I mean, I think
Sure.
if you look at the expanded universe, you see the Clone Wars, you see very much like what you're saying. You see a very kind of militaristic standard that a lot of the pilots are held to, which would make sense if they're troopers, if they're part of an infantry, to where you're supposed to be clean-shaven, you're supposed to be crew-cutted. The Empire is nothing if not uniform in what they ask of their participants. So yeah, it did seem a little odd.
Right, and so perhaps he's not so much miscast as the costume design wasn't accurate for his role.
Sure,
that could be it, but I didn't. That led me to question, like, well, maybe he shouldn't be in that role. Maybe they should have cast him. But maybe just a good shave and a haircut would have done it.
It's the least memorable role of the movie. So I really didn't think about his character that much, period.
Well, I don't think that about anybody else in the cast.
Right.
Because they're rebels.
Right.
Well, if Felicity Jones showed up with a beard, I'd be kind of...
Yeah, that would be a little weird.
Right, for sure. So let's talk about her.
Yeah.
Her versus Boyega, her versus Poe, or her versus...
Well, they let her keep her British accent, unlike Boyega, which is kind of cool. No, I think Felicity Jones has one of those faces that, even though we've seen her in things, like, we almost forget about her. I mean, by the time she did Rogue One, she'd already had an Oscar nomination for Theory of Everything. And yet, she still looked like a fresh face. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was kind of appealing. Like, hey, I haven't seen this, actress before. Or I have, but I've forgotten about that. And to me, anytime I can be in that situation, it always kind of adds a little bit of mystery, not just to the character, but the character's journey. It's like I kind of know that if I see Tom Cruise, he's going to survive to the end of the movie, right? If I see Tom Hanks, he's probably not going to die at the end of the movie. So seeing a new performer I'm like, gosh, you know what? I don't know what's going to happen to them because they're a brand new performer. So I think it was kind of appealing.
Please excuse me as I'm pulling up my IMDb.
Yeah.
Because I want to look at the cast. I think that's a valid point. And I think that might have been done intentionally. She was born in 83. Just think about that.
Yeah, so...
And the poster for Rogue One, I went apeshit over the poster.
Right.
Which you can find on IMDb.
Right.
That just called back to everything I ever wanted in 1980.
Indeed.
Right.
And I think, that kind of carried over to the trailer. Like, I think we're so used to seeing these armored walkers, just in the snow or in the forest, so kind of seeing them on the beach was really cool. Like, oh wow, they've got those there too. I guess I think of these as only like Hoth things. Even though they had the scout walkers, I guess on Endor or the Endor moon, but see them on the beach. It's like, oh well, I guess they have these everywhere. So that was really cool to kind of bring those back, since those hadn't really been brought back in any Star Wars movie. I know we got a kick out of it at the time because my little brother, who works for the Four Seasons hotel chain, he was in the Maldives where they shot.
Oh, nice.
Rogue One. It was a different island, but he would try to explain to us, like, okay, what does the Maldives look like? It's this island paradise out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and then they shot the end of Rogue One there in the Maldives. So he's able to say, yeah, that's what it looks like.
The opening scene where you see the AT-ATs come up the horizon onto the beach was the same feeling I had when I was 5 or 6 and I saw them on Hoth.
Yeah.
I went through the same emotional experience.
Right.
That really keyed everything in. There was a moment in the trailer, unfortunately, that Edwards had shot that was cut, and it was Jen dressed as an Imperial pilot, and she was in a tunnel, and the tunnel lights up.
Yeah.
And you will still see GIFs.
Oh, yeah.
All over Twitter of that shot. That shot is not in a movie.
Right.
And I wish if there were one shot from the trailer that should have made the movie, that should have been it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That really had a halo effect around her as a sort of symbolic saint.
Right.
If anyone's going to save us in this situation, it's going to be her.
Yeah. And I harken back to that great art direction of the original Star Wars, what masterfully designed ships these were. Not just were functional and dangerous, but had this great look too. And I think because this did connect and lead right up to what's so familiar with us in the Star Wars universe and A New Hope, I think it was really special. There was some fan servicing, no question.
Of course.
But it wasn't indulgent. I think it fit right in seamlessly. So I really appreciated that. And I mean, I did appreciate the Easter eggs and the servicing a little bit too, but it didn't seem gratuitous.
No, I don't think that it did. And it made sense versus some of the things in the prequels, which didn't align with things that you held sacred for 15, 20 years. The cast, as far as, Alan Tudyk is K2SO.
Right.
We're so used to having these attachments with droids. And BB-8 is cute, but that's about all he is.
Yeah.
And that cone dog from
the
Rise of Skywalker,
yeah.
He's cute, but that's about all he is. And we mentioned before about how he just sort of lost the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern wandering through the plot type of situation.
Right.
K2SO is not a member of that type of Greek stroping that we've got going on.
Right.
But he's actually a part of the cast, and I thought it was brilliant how they utilized him.
Oh,
as
absolutely.
this reprogrammed droid.
Yeah.
Who was fully aware of the danger of every situation they were in.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was very much a functional member of the team, and had some great lines and had some great humor, but again, didn't seem like it was pandering,
right?
Like some of the other instances
versus
of
Solo,
droids. Right?
Where it just seemed like the droid and that actress who played the droid who was in
Phoebe
love
Waller,
with,
right? I think did it.
I think she did it. I think she did a good job. It wasn't her acting style. It was the direction
the
chosen
droid
for her.
Made some curious choices. Let's put it that way. Yeah,
You can look at it that way.
right.
The weakest link is it's the most. It's really, really famous. We mentioned it before how it was just such a joke about the first movie, the small thermal exhaust port, port, and that is the plot of the first film.
Absolutely. So it redeems something that most Star Wars fans have been just, at best, willing to overlook. At worst, really bothered by that. One small weakness could undo something of that size, and that you would know that.
Mm-hmm.
But now that we see with Rogue One, hey, it's an example of sabotage. I think by somebody who had to, give years of his life working on a project that he did not believe in, and had to be subtle about how he planned to take it down.
Right. Well, and that actor who plays Jyn Erso's father,
right,
Mads Mikkelsen.
Yeah.
We're so used to seeing him as a villain,
right?
So seeing him as this protective father, that was great. The entire opening, of director Krennic landing down and trying to rope him in. When Krennic shows up, and it's I can't remember that actor's name, but he's been in tons since then.
Yeah, we just saw him on The Outsider too. Yeah, I should know his name.
Ben Mendelsohn.
Okay,
he was in Ready Player One.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I just immediately, particularly because of the outfit, he looked like he walked off the Death Star in 1977.
Exactly.
It was, or 1974, I should say.
Right.
It just immediately, in the shuttle, the old shuttle from Jedi, it just harkened back. So you immediately saw symbols that you placed you into a specific time period.
Yeah.
And to a lot of us who had been waiting so long to see that, I think it just gave us this shot of adrenaline.
Yeah, right? Absolutely.
Now, I got to ask, I'm sorry to be jumping all the way around here, but I got to ask about Forrest Whitaker.
Mm-hmm.
I love Forrest Whitaker. I'll watch him in anything. We just saw him in Panic Room a few nights ago.
Right.
And he's in The Crying Game. And I think he won an Oscar for The
Last King of Scotland.
Yeah, Last King of Scotland, which was phenomenal.
Great performance.
Love that film. Great performance. Hard-working actor.
Right.
In an industry that you have to think, geez, black, a little bit of a lazy eye, overweight.
Right.
Oh, what is he doing in this industry? And it's because he's so goddamn talented.
Right.
And that's why guys like us were like, oh, Forrest Whitaker's in that? Sold.
Right.
Maybe it was the costume, but did he fit into Rogue One?
It was a little ridiculous to be. And if nothing else, maybe we kind of joined this story at the end of Saw Gerrera's story, when I kind of wanted a little bit more. I kind of feel like for him to be this major catalyst in the rebellion, I kind of wanted a little bit more backstory from him before, we took this whole journey kind of based on his involvement and his help. And I didn't know it till last year. I had watched the Clone Wars, and the character Saw Gerrera appears in the Clone Wars as one of those. I can't remember if he was a Jedi that just, kind of just didn't like following rules, or he was a figure in the rebellion, but he was only in like 1 or 2 episodes. He was a kind of minor character, and I don't know which came first, if it was them laying the groundwork for Rogue One, or Rogue One just kind of picked up on a forgotten rebel character that was mentioned, so that there'd be some familiarity. It's kind of hard to screw up a rebellion, so, or to have different approaches to the rebellion. So, I don't know if he was more like the hardcore terrorist branch of the rebellion. But it did leave me wanting a little bit more explanation as to.
There's several things you can pick out of that. Like I read something online. Well, he's the Yondu of Rogue One. I don't particularly agree with that.
Yeah, no, I think he's a little bit more dangerous there. Maybe for some reason why Mon Mothma, wouldn't want to work with him.
Right.
But obviously Jyn Erso has that kind of father figure connection with him, to where he's important from that standpoint.
Yeah, he is an extremist.
Yeah.
But this is an alliance.
Right.
So I get that. I'm hesitant to use the word terrorist because if you're fighting the empire,
right?
And that's your goal. Like what I don't remember what film it is. I can't believe I don't remember what film it is. So someone say, well, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom. It's a James Bond film. It's The World Is Not Enough.
Okay.
1999, Pierce Brosnan. And they talk about Robert Carlyle's character. Well,
sure.
He's a terrorist, and the objection is, well, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom
Everyone's
fighter.
the hero of their own story,
well,
right?
This person, here's the thing, like this person is not interested in anyone's freedom except his own.
Right.
And I think that doesn't apply to Ben Gazzara. Not Ben Gazzara.
Saul Guerrera.
Saul Guerrera.
Yeah.
Ben Gazzara is an actor.
Right.
St. Jack, 1979.
But Ben Gazzara could be a Star Wars name.
He could.
Yeah.
He could be, totally.
Yeah.
It's probably a pod racer.
Yeah, right.
So Saul Guerrera, he hates the Empire so much. They make it up to be that he is this ruthless character, and he'll cut you loose if it's his survival and not
right.
But his goal seems to be the same.
It is. I think maybe they're just where they're mincing words is maybe the casualties of war. Hey, we're going to do something, and if some civilians die. I mean, I kind of got that impression. Then so be it.
Oh my God! I mean, that's a valid point. But I mean, how many hundreds of thousands of people did we kill in Japan?
Right.
Between 1943 and 1945. I mean, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of civilians had nothing to do with the war effort.
Right.
And I'm not making excuses for it, but that's what happens in war.
It is.
Any war you get into.
And yet, you watch, the old films, you kind of watch Leia Organa, you watch Mon Mothma, you kind of watch their decision-making process, and that seems to be a factor in all of their decisions, even if it means patience. Mm-hmm. Whereas Saul Guerrera, at least I kind of got the impression that he probably was one more for urgency and expedient action, because that's what it took to take down an empire.
Well, it looked like he'd been in that business a long time.
It did. Right.
Yasser Arafat was, I don't remember how old he was, late 60s when he died.
Right.
Been fighting Israel his entire life.
Right, exactly.
So to him, maybe it was urgent.
Right. Maybe so.
Maybe it was urgent. And I do feel, say what you want, people. Go ahead and write your nasty emails. I do feel that Yasser Arafat's objective was to free his people. He felt that was, and whatever we think of that motive, I think that he felt that was true.
Right.
So that's a good part. So Whitaker. So we think that Whitaker. Do you think he could have been replaced by a better actor, or do you think it was just the get-up?
I think it was probably more the get-up than the actor.
Because I enjoyed the voice.
Yeah, I enjoyed the voice too, but I think it was kind of the get up without the explanation or something like that. But maybe you picked up on it, kind of like the Yasser Arafat comparison. Is here somebody may have been 60, but was probably in the body of a 100-year-old,
right?
Because of the toll the fight took on him.
Yeah.
And so I think I got that to some point. And I think without Galen Erso's message, he probably wouldn't have even been brought into this story. Mm-hmm. He probably just would have continued, and then been none the wiser when his planet is blown up by the Empire.
Yeah. Now there's a lot of I believe that he's gone 2/3 of the way through the movie, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
So it's not something that reshoots or anything could have fixed. Not like the opportunities they had in Solo, for example, which we'll get to. But I think that's it. I just wanted to wind up by saying I think that Tony Gilroy did. I shudder to think. You have to think of it in terms of this, because sometimes you hear about these screenings in Hollywood. Yeah. And sometimes they go right, and sometimes they go wrong. And then sometimes what you hear is not what happened. Like, for instance, A Touch of Evil in 1959. Mm-hmm. Orson Welles came back to Hollywood, made one film for Universal. Universal was basically a B-movie monster studio for a very long time. Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman, all that. Abbott Costello meets the Wolfman. And so he shot a film noir in Venice, California, practically within a month. Charlton Heston plays this Mexican lawyer on the border.
Right.
They screen it And the Hollywood executives look at it and they said, "Oh my God, what are we going to do? This is so horrible." And then proceed to basically edit down and pan the movie, release it to a restricted audience. And the only one who sees it in full is a European audience. It's like, it's fine if the Europeans see it.
Right.
But we don't want Americans to know how bad this movie is. Wells didn't have final cut. 30 years later, 50 years later, Walter Murch, the famous Hollywood editor who edited Apocalypse Now, has a couple of Oscars. They gave it to him. He re-edited it using Wells's 50-page memorandum of what is wrong with this movie.
Right.
Supervised. They put it together. They issued it on DVD. They reissue it in the theaters. The American Film Institute chooses Touch of Evil to be the best film of 1999.
Right.
And so what is it that they saw that was so horrible in the film? I don't know. So there's a part of me that's very reserved about what did the studio see when they saw Rogue One in the first cut. What was it that they saw that they didn't like, which made Kathleen Kennedy and the rest of Disney go, "Oh my God, we have a problem"? What do you think that it was?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're nitpicking Saw Gerrera and stuff like that, but I mean, really half the movie is setup, and half the movie is the mission. And if I hadn't followed the studio and the kind of the musical chairs, the directors, as closely as you had, but if Tony Gilroy's contribution was the second half of the film, I mean that's the most important part of the film. That's kind of the mission. So I don't know. I don't know if the original director just really kind of botched the actual mission. But to me, it seemed like everything else leading up to that was set up. And I think we're willing to go along with it. There's nothing necessarily wrong with it. But it's not everyone's favorite part of the film. Mm-hmm. It's not what we're going to judge Rogue One by, at least in my opinion. It's going to be the actual mission. It's almost like a heist movie.
Right.
Kind of at the end, but with much bigger stakes than just going to jail.
Right. Well, I can't wait to get into that with you with the solo. Here, let me get a beer if you don't mind.
All right.
No embarrassing beer. Okay. So, I understand. I don't understand everything that they saw. Everyone pretty much associated with the project is contractually obligated not to talk about it.
Right.
Gareth Edwards has not said anything. Tony Gilroy has done one podcast in which I don't say that he avoided anything, but he was very frank about stuff that we kind of would already assume happened.
Mm-hmm.
He said that when he came onto set, everyone was 100% supportive. And they said, whatever you want to do, we're on board. He had to fire some minor department heads, and he had to change some studio decisions.
Right.
But pretty much that was it. The entire introduction of Darth Vader was his idea.
Okay.
And the addition of the chase at the end, which, considering how we all knew it was going to wind up, I could not believe how tense and on my seat I was.
Right.
Hoping like, oh shit, is Leia going to get away? Of course she's going to get away.
Right, exactly.
Well, I guess you could say she's caught in the next,
exactly.
The beginning of the next film, but I wasn't so sure, man. Vader was on her like a wolfhound.
Exactly, and I think it was one of those things. If you see it back, you got to suspend disbelief a little bit, because I think you see Vader, and it is some of the most badass, ruthless Vader carnage that you'll ever see on film. Mm-hmm. And then he'll turn around, I guess, like literally a week later, and have that weak-ass 1977 lightsaber duel, old man lightsaber duel with Obi-Wan Kenobi. So I guess his lightsaber skills regress quite a bit in a week, but I didn't care.
Yeah.
Because there was such that adrenaline rush from just seeing him come out of the dark and throw people up on the ceiling. It was tremendous. And especially since, he's probably the one bad guy that we'll just out and out root for in the Star Wars saga.
Yeah.
Whether because he redeems himself at the end or because, there's nothing like full out Vader. I think he's everyone's favorite villain of all time. So I absolutely loved that addition at the end.
Yeah.
The film didn't need it, but since it had it, man, that was a thrilling way to get up from your seat.
It just made everything sweeter.
It did.
How the rebels just scattered. Like like an oncoming wave just wiped them all out. And particularly, I just remember that one guy at the door, like, let me out.
Yeah.
And there's just knowing that there was no hope. And just the fear of being in that room locked in with someone like that.
Right,
it's
absolutely.
Excruciating fear. And I thought that Gilroy did a fantastic job of conveying that to the audience.
Absolutely.
Now, Billie Lourd was a stand-in for her mother in this film.
Right.
I know that she was in the last two.
Yeah.
I want to say she was in Rogue One, but I can't say that for sure. And then they basically mapped over her face with a younger version of Carrie Fisher. They had a mold of Carrie Fisher's face, which they used for I want to say Jedi when they made models for the Forest Run. I don't know where the hell those were for 40 years and who remembered that they were there.
Right.
There's a great show on Disney Plus called Props. And it's these guys that go into the Disney Vault. And they find old Disney props. My wife raves about the Mary Poppins episode. My favorite one is Tron.
Okay.
If you want to go back some memory lane, you can see the one on Tron. Anyway,
nice.
So they used that mold, scanned it, and Carrie Fisher was still alive at the time.
Right.
So I believe they used her voice, and I thought it. I mean, the first time I saw it, I couldn't believe it wasn't her.
Yeah.
Like it was. There are a lot of people that complain about CGI in films. I know that I just saw a documentary on HBO Max called Spielberg, and it went over the arc of his career so far. And they interviewed 4 or 5 people: Kathleen Kennedy, Frank Marshall, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and Dennis Muren. Dennis Muren was big guy at ILM for most of his career. ILM had been working on CGI for 10 years, and Steven Spielberg needed a walking dinosaur, needed one, and went to Kathleen Kennedy and said, "I need one, and if I can't have one, we ain't making this."
Right.
So she went to animatronics, and they basically said, "It'll do anything but run. Cannot run." Spielberg said, "Not good enough." This is Steven fucking Spielberg.
Right,
Kathleen Kennedy was not going to say no.
Right.
So she went to ILM. They all got in a room, and all 5 of them said the same thing. When they first saw that dinosaur leap across the screen for the first time, all of them said, "Oh my God." Now, I am not actually a Jurassic Park fan.
Right.
I think in the Spielberg pantheon, it's probably in the bottom quartile. It's not a bad movie. It's just that it doesn't interest me as a story.
It was fun in '93.
Everyone thought so. Like, I didn't mind going to see it. I will see any movie, even bad ones. I saw fucking Showgirl 6 times in the theater because that's how much I love train wrecks.
Right. But
you cannot deny the power of that moment. And
absolutely,
one of the guys said, quote, "I'm not exaggerating when I say it is the equivalent of sound."
Right.
Of what movies were in 1929 and what they were in 1930.
Sure.
He said it was just as profound. And when Tron Legacy came out, and everyone complained about Jeff Bridges' face on Clue and how it just looked fake. Man, I think that particular film is kind of a matter of opinion. Like, I thought it looked pretty good.
I did too.
And I mean, he was supposed to look like a program.
Right. It was stylized enough. I think.
Like a video game.
Yeah.
And maybe it was a problem because all the other programs were actors and they didn't look the same way.
Right.
What if you did them all that way? Like, can you imagine how much that would cost? I get it. But bad CGI exists. I mean, fucking Cats.
Right.
Last year proves how bad it could be.
Right.
So when I say I sat in a seat and I saw the girl I fell in love with.
Right.
Again. That elicited a moment out of my heart.
Sure.
That was really amazing.
Yeah.
And I can't believe they recreated it. I was absolutely for it.
It really was pretty special. And I thought the Tarkin, it probably looks a little bit better than the Tarkin, which, I think it probably helps that the actress was still alive, that she had a daughter that looks an awful lot like her. I don't know who they used to have, Tarkin's stand in, because, Peter Cushing's been dead for 30 years now or something like that. But I thought it was just as thrilling to see Tarkin again. Because Tarkin is someone I maybe didn't pay a whole lot of attention to as a kid, but as I start rewatching, I think Peter Cushing in A New Hope gives the single greatest acting performance of the entire Star Wars saga. I think he's exactly what I want an empirical villain to be. He's smart, he's calculating, he's thinking 3 steps ahead, he's still confident and arrogant. And so I like that part. And I know the novelization of Rogue One really played up just the tension between Krennic and Tarkin. That Krennic has done all of this to design the Death Star, and then Tarkin just says, "I'll take it from here,"
right?
And get all the credit with the Emperor, and that real tension, and that's what drives Krennic to just lose it. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was just a fascinating dynamic among very powerful people in the Empire, and to me it felt a lot more authentic than Kylo Ren and what Bill Weasley. I don't even remember his name. Well, in the Star Wars saga.
I wrote about that in my review of The Last Jedi, about how I just felt like the original trilogy just had these. It was a generational conflict, and you had these old guys, Captain Nita and Admiral Viet, and they were just these old, decrepit, corrupt establishment. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of like The Graduate. The young people were coming in and trying to take over type of situation. And I was thinking, like, really, like, people are fucking following Bill Weasley like that?
Yeah, Hux didn't seem like he earned. And I remember in that Star Wars saga, again, from kind of more from the novelizations, that his father was like a general as well. I think ended up being murdered by Captain Phasma or something like that.
Okay.
With I think with Hux's approval or suggestion, maybe even, that he kind of took over for his father by overthrowing him. But that never really that rank in the military hierarchy of the First Order never felt earned to me.
Whereas in Rogue One, you go back to the same strata that you're used to.
Yeah.
Now, down to Governor Tarkin again, and Peter Cushing, his lines in the first film, and his timing and his pacing. Like, I know that there's a director there.
Yeah.
But I think that there's something to it. I mean, he and Alec Guinness are the veterans,
right,
in this, and I don't believe they ever meet. But that line where he turns around to the princess and says, in a way, you will have the choice to choose who suffers first, or something to that effect. It's the way that he delivers the lines.
Yeah.
When he says another target, a military target, then name the system. Like, there's a logical flow to the way that he's conveying his ideas.
Right.
And it's something that you have to put into context of particularly that film of, these are what they're up against. Mm-hmm. These are what the rebels are fighting. Right. Guys like Tarkin.
These are very capable, very intelligent, very seasoned military leaders.
Right.
That are used to bringing out the big guns, too.
Yes.
And so, I think it does create a little bit more urgency for the rebellion as a whole. It's like, hey, we're not just getting a bunch of Ewoks to take down some scout troopers here. It's like, this is what we're up against, this huge military-industrial complex.
Yeah, so now, I remember fucking Fred Astaire dancing with a vacuum cleaner.
Right.
30-second commercial.
Yeah.
I'm not cool with that.
Right.
Peter Cushing's estate, which included his children, decided that they wanted to do this. They sold it. Lucasfilm sold it.
And it was done tastefully.
I think that it was.
I think that's something to where, I don't want to suddenly see a new James Dean movie.
No.
But I think if we're resurrecting a character within a franchise, I'm okay with that if the actor's estate is, because I certainly think that that's one of the things that CGI can do well, is kind of de-age people. Samuel L. Jackson can't go back to being 20, but you look at something like Captain Marvel, and I thought, hey, it's Samuel L. Jackson at 20.
I didn't notice anything.
I didn't notice that at all.
Well, he looks so good anyway.
Right, exactly. But I think Gemini Man Will Smith did look. They didn't have the budget that Captain Marvel did, but young Will Smith looked like young Will Smith. I think that's a really encouraging use of CGI. So to resurrect somebody who's dead, but you have enough film of the character, and you're resurrecting that character, I'm okay with that. And certainly more willing to do that in the Star Wars canon, just because there's still so much more you can tell about that time frame. So that's I was thrilled to have Tarkin resurrected, just as much as Leia.
Other than his neck, which in a couple of shots looked kind of video game-ish.
Right.
I thought it was passed over very well.
Yeah, I thought so too.
My only reservation would be, and of course there's nothing in terms of Cushing, but in the future actors are going to have to decide this. They're going to have to say, okay, my image dies with me.
Right.
And no one's allowed to use it. They're going to have to specifically say that, or they're going to have a law. Right.
Or it depends on how hard up their nieces and nephews are for money.
Right.
20 years after the dead. So let me float a fan theory by you that came out of Rogue One in discussions with one of my cousins who's roughly our age, but had a revelation after seeing Rogue One. And it had specifically to do with the character of Chirrut Imwe, that kind of blind monk, who would say, I am one with the Force and the Force is with me, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing. But he specifically says this through a scene on Scarif where all the Imperial troopers are shooting at him while he's, I think, going to do something, and they miss him. And so my cousin's takeaway from that is it's the will of the Force that he should succeed. The Force is directing all of those shots to go astray. And he saw a parallel in that to just how god-awful a shot all the stormtroopers seem to be when they're trying to hit Luke, Leia, and Han in the saga.
The Force is...
So that the Force is kind of willing a poor marksmanship, because what they want to see is this return to balance. They want to see the rebels succeed in overthrowing the Empire. And because of that, that's why stormtroopers can't hit anything. So what do you think about that? That's kind of an extreme theory. Is it luck? Right. Is it the will of the Force?
I love it. I love that argument.
Yeah.
I hope this is the only podcast that the argument is on. That is an amazing argument.
Right.
I've never heard that.
I'll credit Derek Wilson. So my cousin. Yeah.
Highly original. And
yeah.
I love every second of it. I'm going to forward that every time I watch Star Wars now. I'm going to put the characters in that situation and see if it's true.
Yeah.
Particularly like Vader cuts down Obi-Wan and Luke is run into the ship.
Yeah.
Run into the Falcon and there's lasers flying all over the place. Now that's something to think about. Right
sure.
There. That's pretty cool.
Because, you look at the way they gunned down, Galen Erso's wife at the beginning.
Brutal.
They can hit a target, right? They obviously can kill, Beru and Owen in A New Hope. They can kill the Jawas and everything like that. They can hit their mark when they're not aiming at these people.
Or when they're not using lethal weapons, like they can stun Leia.
Oh yeah, they can stun Leia. That's a hard shot to hit, right?
And it doesn't really work on droids.
Right.
C-3PO got famously blasted to bits.
Sure.
Okay, Solo.
Yes.
This movie made over $100 million.
Yeah.
In the theaters.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that it's close to the $1 billion mark now. It hasn't lost money. It's made a lot of money.
Sure.
So my first question is Solo a failure at all, or is this just dogged by bad press?
I think it's dogged by bad press. I think it had probably a higher profile change of directors than Rogue One did, where it's a little bit more subtle. I think maybe Lucasfilm was more excited about working with those two guys from the Lego Movie and giving them the keys to the kingdom. And so, and maybe Ron Howard is a more high profile replacement, so to speak, than Tony Gilroy. So I wonder what they had been doing, especially since, their background had been in kind of these high concept comedy. Were they making a joke out of Solo? Was it tongue in cheek? Why were they replaced? And I have a feeling that, like Rogue One, we may never know. So I wonder if it's some bad press that kind of gives it a bad rap. I think it's a fun movie. I don't hold it to the level of Rogue One, which I thought was a masterful movie, telling a very specific story in the Star Wars canon. I thought Solo was just fun. It was kind of pure trashy fun. And I was willing to overlook a lot of stuff just because I enjoyed the 2 hours I spent watching it, which I can't say about necessarily Attack of the Clones or Phantom Menace, at least not on the rewatch.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I understand that the tone and the tongue-in-cheek, particularly of Han, and the entire comedy aspect of the film was completely not what Lucasfilm wanted.
Right.
And not what Disney was expecting.
Sure.
And I understand that the rough cut of the film sent them into a crisis meeting. And they had to make a snap decision because they had a release date, which later was pushed.
Right.
Which, as painful as it sounds, they probably should not have pushed it.
Right.
Because that's the first indication of trouble.
Right.
But they had to do what they had to do. And I also understand that Kathleen Kennedy was not going to pull the trigger unless she had a replacement before.
Right.
And luckily, she and Ron Howard known each other for 40 years. And he agreed to do it before the others were even fired.
Now, sidebar here. Has anybody replaced directors more often than Kathleen Kennedy?
Replace direct. So she.
If she did this mid-picture Rogue One, mid-picture Solo.
No, mid-picture Rogue One, not mid-picture Solo. So
okay.
So Woody Harrelson went on to a podcast. I think it was Christopher Tapley, and that was the first question. Like, they couldn't ignore it. Like it.
Yeah,
this
right.
is one of those situations where there was no point in getting anybody to sign an NDA.
Right.
Because it was already so much news. And Woody Harrelson said that he was talking about it with, I think, Matthew McConaughey, and they're friends. And to no one's shock or surprise. And they were both saying...
TV days, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And they were both saying how, it was the only time... They're both actors in their late 40s, early 50s.
Right.
It was the only time it had ever happened to Woody Harrelson. And McConaughey it never happened. You're talking about a guy who's been acting since the early 90s.
Right. It's probably 50 movies, right?
Right, yeah. And it's really, really rare today. There have been some really high-profile replacements.
Sure.
They usually come at the beginning of shooting.
Right.
Spartacus, for example, was famously 1 week into shooting, and Kirk Douglas fired the director. And flew from Spain to Hollywood, met with Stanley Kubrick, who had just been fired from One-Eye Jacks after 1 week with Marlon Brando.
Right. And
so he took over Spartacus. Marlon Brando decided to direct One-Eye Jacks himself. So you do have situations like Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz had 3 directors. Victor Fleming was one of them. They kind of had different assignments.
Right.
You do the musical scenes, you do the dramatic scenes.
And that kept going even into the 60s, where you see kind of the Robert Wise movies and stuff like that had they gave a director credit for the musical numbers.
Sure, and yes, and Busby Berkeley, for example, and all of his musical numbers were directed by him, and they would have Mervyn Lewis do all dramatic stuff. In the golden age of Hollywood, which is roughly from 1922 to 1962, when Hollywood was a factory, and all the studios were factories, and you had contracts, and you were paying people by the week. Replacing directors was very commonplace.
Sure.
And particularly during the blacklist, when sometimes you just wake up one morning and, oh shit, I can't hire him. Mm-hmm. Or that project that he was working on, he can't work on that project anymore. Replacing directors was fairly commonplace. Mm-hmm. And in TV, even today, it's not common, but it does happen.
Sure.
You know, in this particular circumstance, this is it's almost like they weren't fired. And I'll tell you why. They finished principal photography. Mm-hmm. This was kind of something that wasn't shared at the time. A lot of people think that, well, they reshot some of the film.
Yeah.
Or they reshot a lot of it. No. Ron Howard's name is on this film. So by Directors Guild law, 70% or more of this film must be shot by Ron Howard. Period.
Okay. Right.
So that's a Ron Howard movie. What I had heard subsequently after the McConaughey interview was every single frame of that fucking movie is Ron Howard's. He reshot the entire thing.
Really?
He didn't do inserts. That's it.
Right.
He had a second unit do the inserts.
Right.
Under his direction.
Okay.
When I heard that, I couldn't believe it because of the amount of material that they are just throwing away or wasting.
Right.
I mean, you're talking about special effects shots and all that. No, like the entire Kessel Run.
Yeah.
He completely reconcepted that himself.
Right, right.
I was shocked when I heard that. I just thought they're just pulling in someone to handle the drama.
Right.
And then to go from there. No, Kathleen Kennedy apparently said, Ron, take it.
Right.
And he took it. And apparently there was a lot of confidence on set that it's okay. Because everyone was so exceedingly happy that someone like Ron Howard, who had been in film since he was 2,
right, exactly,
was here and had known his way around every aspect of making a movie,
right,
and is just in reality every inch an expert that Spielberg is.
And most of those actors had worked with Ron Howard on something.
Oh, I'm sure that's true.
Yeah, you think of Paul Bettany in A Beautiful Mind.
I didn't remember that.
Woody
Harrelson was at TV.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, you had a lot of.
Oh my God, I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
Paul Bettany was in A Beautiful Mind.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. Now, Alden Ehrenreich, I thought was almost like the perfect person to play Han.
Sure.
And I would this is the danger when you get into the situation. It's like Bob Gale, the guy who wrote Back to the Future, and co-produced it, if I remember correctly. He said like he wants people to see what Eric Stoltz did on Back to the Future,
right?
And he said it's not any slight to Eric. It's just that it's just not what we wanted.
Right.
He did everything that we asked him to do.
Sure.
It's just not what we wanted out of the picture. But people like Zemeckis particularly and Spielberg don't want it to be seen because they don't want anybody making fun of Eric Stoltz.
Right. Okay.
Right. And so you've got this sort of two sides of people should see what it would have become, and then no, we really need to protect the actor. At this point, Eric Stoltz is in his 50s. I don't think he gives a shit.
Right, exactly.
He's got his
career turned out okay. I mean, it would have been better had he been in 3 Back to the Future movies.
Right.
but it turned out okay.
Probably would not have made as much money.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that aspect, when you look at Ehrenreich, I got to say, man, I was expecting more. Mm-hmm. And particularly when you have Han moments, like Harrison Ford has a more baritone voice.
Right.
And particularly when he's flustered and, hey, wait a minute, and everything drops down, and when he gets flustered into an argument or something, he starts shouting at people. And Ehrenreich has a higher tone voice. Right. And I don't want to be nitpicky, but Ewan McGregor, who's from Glasgow,
right,
spent months learning Cockney.
Right.
And I think he did a pretty phenomenal job.
Absolutely. Like you almost, if you played some random lines side by side, and I think you would struggle to say which is Alec Guinness and which is Ewan McGregor.
Yeah.
The cadence.
Yes.
It was perfect. So yeah, I kind of get where you're going with that. Is maybe there's a couple of things that he got the cadence right, but some other ones you're right. I think it was a little higher, readier voice, almost kind of like a young Leonardo DiCaprio, kind of that higher kind of vocal timbre. So yeah, it wasn't quite a match. I think what I was willing to overlook from that standpoint is there was enough of a physical resemblance. But I thought this was the most interesting Han Solo we've seen since maybe A New Hope. Because we kind of get to see the scoundrel Han Solo.
Yeah.
His turns kind of quicker in the second half of Empire, where obviously he's captured and he's put in carbonite, and then I don't think he has a whole lot to do in Return of the Jedi. And then we see him in The Force Awakens. He's a much older Han Solo. So I almost wanted to see more stories of that young scoundrel, that young smuggler. And so I think I was kind of willing to overlook some of those things that didn't quite line up, just because I think, hey, that's an interesting story of a character that I always loved, that I want to see more of at that time of their life.
I'd be perfectly willing to see another Solo.
Oh, I'd love to. Love to.
I think that I very much disagree with the idea that the franchise is in trouble.
Yeah, I don't think that at all. And I think we're kind of nitpicking Alden's performance. I think his greatest sin is he was upstaged by Donald Glover as the Lando. Man, that was some great casting.
He came on hard, didn't he?
I loved his Lando.
And the minute you heard his name, you were rubbing your hands together going,
absolutely.
Perfect.
Yes.
This is going to be great.
Yes. So I would love to see more with those two. And, of course, we don't miss a beat kind of with the transition between Chewbacca's. I think it was Junis or whatever his name is. I think he'd done this one before he started doing the new saga. I think that's when the handoff happened from Peter Mayhew, because he was probably already
right
about 70 around that time. So yeah, I'd love to see more with those three, if there's more stories to be told. Now there were some interesting things that kind of came out of Solo. One of the things, and I'm sure we could find the official Star Wars answer to this, but what is the timeline here? So like compared to the Battle of Yavin, which I realize for a lot of people is kind of like the BC AD delineation, is everything in Star Wars is told before Battle of Yavin or after Battle of Yavin.
Well, considering Han's age, and Harrison Ford looks to be late 30s, early 40s by the Battle of Yavin. You're talking, if he's in Solo, if he's in his early 20s, is what it looks like. So you're like 20 years before the Battle of Yavin.
Okay.
So this looks like it's shortly after the fall of Coruscant.
Okay.
Shortly after the Emperor.
It would have to be, because there is an empire.
Right.
Right. So I mean, we think that Order 66 has to have happened. Palpatine has to have risen from Chancellor to Emperor.
Yeah.
So there is an empire. So we figure it's got to be between Episode 3 and Episode 4.
Yes. Yes.
Maybe halfway in between or something like that.
That seems acceptable to me.
Okay.
Considering Luke is born in Episode 3, and then he's about 1920 in Episode 4.
I think we all accept that Han Solo is probably 7 to 10 years older than Luke Skywalker.
Oh, if Luke is 20, in A New Hope, I guess in A New Hope, I guess he'd be mid-30s, right? I guess by Jedi, it looks like he's about 40. But yeah, by New Hope. So yeah, you are looking at like a 15-year time span. Yeah.
Gotcha. So with that, and I don't know if you know where I'm going with this.
No.
Of course, we want to jump all the way to the end of Solo. But something that I think is really interesting to me is at the end of Solo, you bring back Darth Maul.
Right.
And so, here we have Darth Maul, who obviously died at the beginning of Episode 1.
Which would have been 20 plus years before, 30 plus years before.
Right. And here he is alive again. Now, I know from having watched Clone Wars, they kind of resurrected him a little bit, but you've mentioned that you didn't watch those. So was that like a what the fuck moment for you, kind of seeing Darth Maul come back?
It was. I was really surprised to see him. And I thought it was the perfect setup for another Solo movie.
Yeah.
So I was really disappointed when they said we're stopping
right
all Star Wars
because it did seem
development.
like a setup.
It did, and I would be interested in seeing that.
Because where I think they were going was, hey, I heard about this job on Tatooine. We know when A New Hope starts that Han Solo's on the run from Jabba the Hutt because he did a job for Jabba
right.
and
So
dumped
what
his
is
cargo.
that job?
Right.
What went wrong?
That's a perfect setup for another that I really want to see.
That is a perfect setup.
But I guess they're not going to do that. I don't know. Maybe they will. I think that goes back to whether or not Solo was enough of a success for the studio to put $200 million towards a new one.
So therein lies the problem. Is that Solo had a budget of I think about 101 or 102 million, and so if you're going to reshoot it, then instantly you're in the 204 million dollar run. Now, all of the actors did not make double salary.
No.
The surprising thing to me was the actor's time. So according to Woody Harrelson, he works, and he was very clear about this, so I'm not extrapolating anything. He works 6 months a year, and then he takes 6 months off.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a house in Hawaii, almost like an island. And he and his family go there, and they don't do fuck all for 6 months. And that's the deal and the bargain that he's made with his family.
Right.
So when Solo happened, they had a 6 month shoot. And sometimes he can work in a whole TV series, or he can work in 2 or 3 movies in that 6 months.
Right.
When that 6 months is up, he's on that fucking island.
Right.
In this aspect, his 6 months was taken up entirely by Solo, which
Right.
he has done several times before. Normally, they block off some time for reshoots, maybe a week or two. Padme escaping the droid factory in the Attack of the Clones was entirely done in London on reshoots.
Okay.
In a span of like 2 or 3 days.
Right.
So that's completely normal. His time was up. He was going to go to the island. They fired the director. Kathleen Kennedy told Woody Harrelson, look, I know that your time is up. We've got to finish this movie.
Mm-hmm.
So Woody Harrelson had a choice. He could work a year for the same money, or he could go back to the island.
Right.
And to him, the part was more important.
Right.
So he stayed and finished the movie, which I have to say, if you think about it, he's paid for the year anyway.
Sure.
Right? So, of course, he'd rather be on a beach.
Right.
It would have been a tremendous cost to replace him.
Right.
And replacing a lot of the cast that late in the game, like, that makes me want to cry.
Right.
You're putting producers in that situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, having said that, Ron Howard's now directing a Solo movie. I'm sure there's plenty of people putting their hands up.
Right.
And
That'll
certain
do it
elements,
for scale, right?
Yeah.
Although I'm sure the back end and the merchandising deals, not insignificant.
The likeness fees,
yes.
Sure, those are fine.
Yeah.
Or the chance to work with Ron Howard.
Yeah.
But he worked for that full year, and then he had a 6 month gig lined up. So he worked 18 months in a row.
Right.
And he reshot the same movie twice.
Right.
And he did say that the entire tone and style of the film completely changed under Ron.
Right.
And people were very good about not saying, "Well, we did this before," and they didn't even bring that up.
Right.
He had his own idea about what to do.
Yeah.
Loved Woody. Loved Tandy Newton.
Yeah.
I liked their chemistry a lot.
Right.
I felt, quite honestly, that the film was rushed.
Yeah.
Like, as you're watching it, it just seems the pace is rushed.
I can see that.
And unfortunately, because we know the backstory,
right,
we're thinking it feels rushed because they were rushed.
Right.
And I think that's unfortunate. I think if they had slowed the pacing down, it would have been better.
Yeah, I think so. And I think this also kind of speaks to maybe the fact that we're willing to give Solo a pass. And I don't know if that comes from us maybe just being a little bit more generous with our critique with this particular movie, or with the fact that we want another one to happen. So we're trying to will that to happen with our withholding of critiques. But yeah, I think it kind of speaks to the type of a Star Wars story that we want to see. I think we want to see something in the universe. But I think it's going to be a love-hate with a kind of a continuation of the saga. Whereas, I have a feeling that, every hardcore Star Wars fan that I've talked to, has probably mixed feelings about episodes 7, 8, and 9.
Mm-hmm.
Probably maybe at least half positive, but mixed feelings. So I think that there was some tempered disappointment. And some of that comes from just, we build this thing up because, episodes 4, 5, and 6 mean so much to us. But I think things like Rogue One and Solo kind of fit in there a little bit easier because, it's just kind of a one-off. It's kind of a contained story. We kind of know where it fits in the whole overarching saga, but we don't know what's going to happen in this story, really. And so that's why I have a feeling that if we do expand the Star Wars saga to maybe start a new trilogy or even a new one-off movie with Rey and Finn and Poe, we're going to be a lot less harsh on it than if we were to see a trilogy continuing the Skywalker saga, as we could see. I don't know. How do you feel kind of about maybe Solo as a one-off, either as a solo story or just as kind of the Lucasfilm's way of filling in the gaps with a standalone story?
Those are good questions. Well, I don't want Solo to be a one-off.
Right.
Now, I'm not giving Solo a pass. I don't feel like I'm giving Solo a pass because, like I was saying, the pacing of the movie.
Sure.
That weird sloth-like gangster in the beginning.
Yeah.
Not big on that. The speeder chase looked like it was going about idle.
Yeah.
Maybe in first gear.
Right.
Just didn't seem like a speeder chase.
Right.
For something that's called a speeder chase, didn't look like it was moving very fast.
Right.
I could tell that even in the trailer.
Sure.
Yeah, the other thing was I like Paul Bettany.
Yeah.
And as an actor, and I thought it was very interesting what they did to his face every time he got angry. But he was recast. So they had a different actor on set, and apparently it was a CGI replacement that they were working on.
Right.
And that was going to be the villain. And obviously all of that was cut. That actor was let go. And Ron Howard picked up the phone and got Paul Bettany.
Right.
I think that was an adequate replacement.
Sure.
I don't think that was a super replacement.
Right.
I think they could have gone much bigger, much wider, much better with the villain.
Right.
Again, nothing to Paul Bettany, and of course, we all have to remember the constraints of time and what they were dealing with. Right. I think they were all doing the best they could with a bad situation.
So, in your perfect Solo movie, kind of what changed, like a non-rushed Solo movie, maybe with Ron Howard. What were some of the things that maybe you would have liked to have seen?
Okay. Retrospectively, what I would like to have seen is a struggle against Jabba, in which they come out on top.
Yeah.
And Jabba's got to grudgingly recognize that this is his best smuggler.
Right.
And Han worms his way into working for his syndicate.
Yeah.
Or the Hutts. The
right.
Hutties, right? That was not a concept. I don't like to go into movies with ideas. I like the film to tell me what it wants to show me. And sometimes those preconceptions can damage a film because a lot of times, well, not a lot of times, and a minority of times, you have a better idea and you think, why didn't they? This seems so obvious to me. Why didn't they do it? I try not to do that. And so I didn't in Solo's case. So when I go in with a blank slate and it's not filled very well, I get very critical.
Sure.
And so it's also a hard argument. I mean, can you really argue with Paul Bettany in the role that he had? Like, he's a great actor.
Sure.
They had a great concept of showing his power and anger. And I thought the character was very original in the Star Wars universe.
Sure. Absolutely.
So it's a hard argument to make, but could they have made a better villain? Yeah, I think they could have.
I think what's appealing to a lot of Star Wars fans about kind of these crime syndicates and about this whole underworld is there's relatively few humans in there.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's kind of appeals to us, is the, hey, show us something new element. Whereas Solo, I mean, you had Chewbacca.
Yeah.
And you had you had Lando's droid. But there, it was pretty much mostly people. Right. I guess you had the one Doug, I guess the Jon Favreau character, right? Didn't he voice the
pilot,
the 6-armed guy? Yeah.
So that was something that I was really upset about because I felt that we lost a character that I was really invested in.
Yeah.
He seemed like a really neat guy, and I was actually thinking I liked the way that he was flying around using all these. I was really thought that was a unique situation, and like General Grievous, he was gone.
Right, exactly.
Within the span of no time, he was gone.
Right. So
maybe
we want to see it, and in that, kind of maybe bringing in the Hutts, again, does kind of bring us into all these different creatures. Not just the Hutts, but they always ran with all different types of aliens and stuff like that. So maybe that would be more interesting.
With a diverse cast.
Yeah.
So the last thing that I have actually is I left the theater. You're going to laugh at this. I left the theater and I asked my wife, who played the girl?
Yeah.
She was really good.
Yeah.
And she said, well, that's Emelia Clarke. And I said, laughingly to all of our audience, who the fuck is Emelia Clarke?
Right. You were the only guy in the world that had been watching.
I was literally the only guy in the world, I think.
Yeah.
And, every time I watch it, she shines.
She does.
Really pops out of the screen. And I watched it once when I got it on digital, because I have it on digital.
Yeah.
And just look, they sometimes they teach you this in film school. Watch the same movie several times and then watch for different things for the entire film. Unfortunately, I took this film class once, and I did this with the movie The Graduate, which basically just soiled that movie for me for all the time.
Oh, no.
So one of the things they did was, you got to watch this movie, and the only thing that we're going to talk about is the lighting.
Yeah.
So you have to look at the lighting at every scene. Then you had to write a paper on it. And then the next one was set design. And then the next one was acting. And then the next one was cinematography. Where physically is the camera moving on every set? We had to map it out.
Right.
And so there was one time where I just saw her in one scene, and I looked at her blocking. And I thought, wow, that... And I rewatched the scene. I'm sorry, I can't remember which one it was. And so then I watched the rest of the film just looking at how she moved in space. And I just thought, that's the director. That's Howard saying, you go here and you do this. So she's only following his instruction.
Right. But
I have to say, her execution of his direction and in terms of blocking was just amazing.
Yeah.
It reminded me a lot of, not in terms of style to Kurosawa, but how specific Kurosawa was in where characters were in a three-dimensional space.
Right.
And it's weird that really comes out. But it really, really surprised me. And I just instantly became a fan.
Yeah, I did too. I was watching Game of Thrones at the time, so I knew who she was. And I know it's probably blasphemy to say, I think, in the nerd universe, I thought she was 10 times more attractive as Kira as she was as Daenerys Targaryen. And I just think she's just a lot more interesting in this role as Kira. So yeah, I loved her in this movie. It's really one of the favorite things I've seen her in.
Yeah, well, that's one of my problems with Game of Thrones is her character, Daenerys Targaryen, is very one-dimensional. I mean, this is her quest, and that's what she's going to do, and get out of my way, and that's it. And this person was very conflicted. Yeah, conflicted about Han, conflicted about who she was working for. Her loyalties were conflicted. Yeah, the only thing that she knew that she didn't like was the Empire. Right. I empathize with that. We all have those two-sided struggles. Right. So my closing story with Emelia Clarke is. Did you make the last Comic Palooza here in Houston? No. Have you ever gone? Have not, no. God damn it, Paul. I know. I'm waiting for my son to be old enough to take him and kind of make that worth it for me, but we'll get there. Okay. So when I moved down in 2016. So did we go? So we went 2017. I took my son in 2017, Comic Palooza. I had a blast. Had an absolute blast. 2018. It's held Memorial Day weekend every year, except for this year it was canceled. 2018 comes, January comes. There's no one signed up as far as celebrities. This was a big deal because in 2017, when I took my son, we saw Tom Holland and Kristen Ritter.
Okay.
So, my son tells people this day, I breathe the same air as Tom Holland.
Oh, my daughter loves Tom Holland.
Gifted actor.
Yes.
Yeah. And talked about Spider-Man and RDJ and the whole thing. My son just had stars in his eyes.
Right.
Then after 2 seasons of Jessica Jones and 1 season of The Defenders, he got to see Kristen Ritter.
Yeah.
He had also seen Breaking Bad. Kristen Ritter's in season 2, I think. So to him, it was like, wow, this is actually, now we weren't like right next to him and we didn't do the meet and greet, but it was that type of fascination. And that star power says a lot. Now that we are, let's just face it, the bastard child of pretty much every exhibition circuit known to man in the United States.
Right.
I don't know if you're familiar with this. You probably are. There's 3 cities in the United States.
Yeah.
New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago.
Right.
And all the rest is what we call flyover.
Right.
And fuck you.
Right.
And that image and that idea of our heartland is dismissive and insulting.
Sure.
For a city of 4.5, 5 million people,
almost 7 in the metro area. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And who are you but a bunch of hicks?
Yeah.
And uncultured people who, thank goodness, we make money off of you, but we're not too interested in doing X. So, even when I was a kid, when we had the Star Trek conventions here, you knew who wasn't going to show up.
Right.
And so January came, February came, March came, and I kept waiting, and they weren't making a whole lot of announcements.
Right.
There were some small sign-ups, and I just thought, well, I'm not going to go.
Right.
My son definitely said, I don't care who's coming. I'm going back to Comic Palooza, and he took a girl, and he was fine. But I will tell you, they announced Emelia Clarke was going to Comic Palooza, and you would have thought the city just exploded.
Oh, I imagine.
It was like the announcing of the Super Bowl.
Sure.
And the week that she signed, there was a flurry of activity.
I'm sure.
Then until about 2 weeks before Comic Palooza, of everybody signing on.
Right.
And I know what it was. A lot of people, you might say, well, they were holding the news. Like they had already signed those people. They were holding the news. And that's not what that does not make any sense at all to me. What happened was she signed, and then everyone all of a sudden discovered that there was this little place on the map called Houston.
Right.
That Emelia Clarke was going to.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have to be there because she's on that circuit.
Sure.
And so I'd like to thank Emelia Clarke for being a fine actress.
Yes.
Actress, not in an insulting way that I use it, just a female actor.
Sure.
Who did a great job in Solo. Mm-hmm. Probably my favorite role in Solo, actually.
Yeah.
And thank you for bringing a little bit of life to the backwater that we call our larger metro area.
Indeed. Well said. So let me ask you kind of this one last thing to close. Yeah. We agree that Solo, we'd love to see more stories with Solo, Kira, Chewie and Lando. We agree that Rogue One was a success. Let's make you the CEO of Lucasfilm. And let's say there's a story that you'd like to see from the Star Wars saga that we know happens from reference or from context that you'd like to see have a standalone feature film.
Well, I don't think that you have to search that hard. I think you can look at their existing projects and just greenlight them. A second Solo film. I don't see why that couldn't be a trilogy.
Sure.
nothing hooked onto Rogue One, but replicating the Rogue One. Like, remember in the beginning of Jedi, Mon Mothma has this very dire speech.
Many Bothans died.
Yes, bringing us. Like, I want to know that story. Bringing us this information. I would like to know that story. The one that excites me the most is the Obi-Wan series.
Yeah,
that was canceled due to the entire freak out after Solo, which Ewan McGregor apparently had signed on for.
Right.
And was, yes, I will absolutely play Obi-Wan. And if it follows the comics, Obi-Wan is a guy who's incognito on Tatooine.
But shit happens on Tatooine.
A lot of shit happens on Tatooine.
Yeah.
With the Hutts, with the Empire. And I am insanely interested in how McGregor brings back that role. There's also the aspect of we all agree the prequels were largely a failure.
Right.
But everyone wants Ewan McGregor back.
Yes.
That should tell you something.
Absolutely.
About the success of him in that role.
Yes.
Right. I remember when they announced it at the time in 1999, and everybody was just like, oh, this is perfect.
Yeah.
This is perfect. Yeah. And they didn't talk about Train Spotting, and they didn't talk about Shallow Grave, and they didn't talk about that weird movie he made, Ordinary Life or an Unordinary, whatever it was.
The Cameron Diaz one.
Yeah.
Life Less Ordinary.
Life Less Ordinary. Yeah. They didn't talk about that at all. All they could talk about was Ewan McGregor's
right.
I think more than anything else, that's what I'd like to see.
Yeah.
And the existing plans. And I disagree with the idea that it's done, that it's over.
Yeah.
I don't think it's done. I don't think it's over.
Right.
It can't be. How good is it going to be? I think they've had two hits. Rogue One and The Mandalorian.
Mandalorian, right.
And they've had two misses. Solo and the trilogy, the second trilogy. And I say don't give up. Just because we're going to be critical, just because some of us aren't going to like them, don't give up.
Right.
Because there can be a huge payoff.
Absolutely. And
it is an invigorating story.
Yeah, I think so.
What about you? What would you like to see?
You know, you kind of touched on it. It's like I loved the underworld. I love the crime syndicates. That could definitely tie into a Solo story. It could tie into a Boba Fett story. But I think the criminal underworld here, because there's so many syndicates that don't get screen time in the saga, but that maybe show up in some of the cartoons or show up in some of the books. And so there's always stuff going on. It's a really interesting cast of characters and a lot of different species. Open it up. I want to see how big this universe is. I want to see creatures of all shapes, sizes, and that's what drew me in as I was kind of watching Star Wars and walking into the Mos Eisley Cantina, and Obi-Wan, Han, Luke, and the bartender are the only humans in that place.
Right.
And yet all these stories have been largely humans and humanoids. So I want to see some of these other people kind of moving around and how they fight and how they shoot and how they speak and how they interact. So I think to me that would be really appealing. And you've got some stuff to work with. You can do kind of that young Han Solo, that young Lando in there. You can do Boba Fett. Any actor can play Boba Fett in a mask, and talk kind of vaguely Australian and kind of get that cadence down. So I think that's the part of the world that I'm always left wanting more with. I think we've filled in a lot of the gaps as far as the rebellion.
Yeah.
Like you said, I'd support how the Bothans got the plans of the second Death Star. I don't know if they would commit the resources to essentially build the exact same movie as Rogue One,
right.
Which is what it would be. But I'd go see it. It'd be fun. But,
for sure.
But yeah, I think that's kind of what I'd like to see.
Absolutely. Anything else you want to add?
No. I think that's good. I've enjoyed talking about these two movies.
That's great.
We think we hold them to different standards than the saga or the prequels or the sequels. But we sure enjoy them.
And maybe that's unfair.
Maybe it is. We've got different standards here. We're a little bit more permissible. I certainly think that the expectations are lower. We know going into Rogue One that it's going to end with the plans being stolen. We know with Solo that Han Solo and Lando and Chewbacca are going to survive. So I think maybe our expectations are a little tempered with those, which is maybe why we want to cut them a little bit more slack. But yeah, do enjoy them.
Well, that's why Rogue One out of the whole group is so special to me. It's Solo is more traditional in terms of the films, and Felicity Jones and Jyn Erso, I should say, the character is such a beautiful character,
right?
And aesthetically, obviously, Felicity Jones is very beautiful, but her character is a survivor.
Yeah, and
she's fought so hard her whole life,
right?
No matter what her circumstances, and the idea that she's not going to escape from that is painful to us.
Sure.
And that's not how the world should work. But we know that's indeed sometimes, for a lot of people in this world, a lot of times,
right?
That is how the world works,
right?
And like Empire, I think that's a reminder to us that maybe there's not a happy ending at all times,
right?
But maybe there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Sure.
The plans get into Leia's hands.
Right. You lose the battle, but you contribute to winning the war.
Right.
Definitely.
And I think as a message, from Star Wars, I don't think that's bad.
No, not at all.
I think that's positive.
Sure.
Thanks for listening to Paul and I work through our feelings on Rogue One and Solo. He'll be back to discuss a famous talking point among cinephiles. What the hell are the voters of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences thinking? You can get the Super 70 podcast anywhere you find podcasts, and if you can't find it, let me know at thatdylandavis@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at thatdylandavis. As for me, my books, and my blog, you can find it all at thatdylandavis.com. That's where I also post film reviews. I'm Dylan Davis, and who the hell knows where you'll see me next time.